The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. How to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So I'm going to be talking about uncomplaining all acceptance. And I have found during these weeks that I've been thinking about and preparing this talk that I've had to train with this very topic, and it's come up a lot. Reverend Master Jiyu would encourage her monks to practice this because it leads to peace and an opening of the heart. Complaining shuts us down and can be a powerful habit. And I'd like to read what Reverend Master Jiyu wrote when she was in Japan. It's called The Perfection of Zen. And I remember her reading this to us or having us read this as a young monk. It says, the temple Reverend Master refers to is Umpukuji in Haino, Maiken, Japan. The perfection of Zen teaching must, of necessity, show itself in the way of the life of the trainee and in his behavior to other people. Otherwise, he has learnt nothing. But perfection is something at which we work. It is not something that we can ever completely achieve. Hence, there is nothing but endless training for the trainee, and no one ever says he is either enlightened or not enlightened. He just goes on in his endless training, doing the best he can. I learned a lot of what I know of the perfection of Zen teaching from the statue of Kannon or Kanzeon in my own temple in the country. When I first took this temple, there was only half a roof, no ceiling, no wall, no gate, a weed patch for a garden, no gas, water, or sewerage arrangements, and only one electric light bulb, which you carried on a long line from the ceremony hall to the one room in which there were mats in which I was to live. I was abbess of this 200-year-old temple, in which even the statue of Kannon needed an umbrella to keep out the rain. And Kannon is Avalokiteshvara, for those of you who don't know. Rats scuttled at her feet, and woodworms gnawed at her pedestal, but her face was completely at peace. With hand upraised in blessing, she gazed down on me in utter serenity, silently blessing the village in spite of the fact that her house had been allowed to fall into ruin, and drunks sported themselves spottily in her meditation hall. For the temple had no parishioners at that time and was known to be the poorest temple in all Japan. For the first few days I did nothing but zazen in the company of the beautiful statue then. As the weather grew warmer, I began to look around me at the state of the temple's dereliction. I gradually collected the money to mend the roof. I put up the ceilings with my own hands, never knowing before that time that I could handle a hammer and nails. Together with friends, we put up a wall and built a gate, and begged enough mats from those who were buying new ones for their houses to cover the floors of all the rooms. As you will see from the newsletter, the house is almost finished, only 3 ceilings now needing very slight repair, and this year a friend is putting in modern toilets. It has been hard work, it has taken a long time, and I have loved every minute of it. But the statue has the same smile of benediction now I have almost finished as when I began. Come rain, sleet, snow, or typhoon, buildings or no buildings, she blesses the village. And when the drunks insult her by making water in her now lovely garden and desecrate her meditation hall, she does not complain. This attitude of uncomplaining all acceptance is one of the signs of the perfection of Zen training, and the complete peace and freedom that training for such an attitude of mind can bring is its own reward. But you may say, I have no such statue to teach me such things. My answer is that you can find spiritual truth in everything you see. Even the most inanimate thing can be the master of a true trainee. Hence the stupidity of looking for a specific person as a master or teacher. If you doubt this, Take a look at the road outside your house. The rain soaks it, the sun scorches it, the traffic churns up its surface, and the dogs and the drunks foul it, without ever a sound of complaint therefrom. When the trainee can become like the road outside his house, completely uncomplaining in the face of all events, both good and bad, as the world understands good and bad, he will have come close to the perfection of Zen. My advice to all of you who grumble and complain is to look with religious eyes instead of worldly ones on everything around you, and make even a blade of grass your master, for it has much to teach. No one expects you to become perfect, but there is room for improvement in all of us. And remember, the 3 signs of enlightenment in our behavior are gratitude for all things and a complete lack of either grumbling or anger. Since a lack of complaining and grumbling is one of the signs of enlightenment, it is worth our while to work on it. For me, it is a work in progress, sometimes doing better than at other times. And perhaps this article is the ideal, and we're just doing the actual. I planned on preparing this talk last Sunday after snack, and something appeared to get in my way, and immediately I felt annoyed, and then angry, and then I felt suffering. And of course, because I was preparing this talk, I just watched it all arise and pass. And because I was doing that, it passed quickly. And I thought, this is a very small thing. What happens when I don't get my way, when things happen that I don't like, when people say or do things that annoy me? These things happen all the time. And then there are the bigger things that can be very difficult to bear. It is really helpful to work on the smaller things. And acceptance doesn't necessarily come easily. There can be a whole process that we have to deal with before we can come to accept some of the more difficult things. And even accepting the little things that go on, I find, takes a lot of awareness and hard work and an ongoing effort. And sometimes I found it can be helpful to have a good grouch about a difficult situation and get a sympathetic response. But too much grouching and complaining does not lead to peace of mind and the acceptance we need to eventually need to bring to a situation. The complaining mind is an unhappy mind. My mother complained about everything and wasn't happy unless she got her way. And then, was she really happy? I don't think so. Nothing was ever enough. We need to widen our scope of what we can accept, and I speak for myself, and not try to control everything so that we will be content. When we work on uncomplaining all acceptance, it doesn't mean that grumbling, complaining, anger, and judgments don't arise. As you know, with everything, we just allow them to arise and allow them to pass. One morning last week in meditation, I had a very grumbly, grumpy, judgmental mind, and I just sat with it, willing to see the cause. I never did see a cause. However, eventually it all stopped, and there was peace and stillness. It had just come and gone without a trace of it having been there. And that doesn't always happen, but that was pretty nice. And it's not really very easy to sit with the grumbling, the grouching, the grumpiness. It's not pleasant, but when it's there, and that's what we sit with. And when we sit with the grumpy mind, we are accepting that as well. That's part of the whole thing. John Samedo, a Theravada monk, in his book Don't Take Your Life Personally, talks about resting in awareness and allowing everything that arises to be there. If it's there, it belongs. So the grumpy mind belongs. But know that if we don't feed it, it can go. It can leave us. But it means we have to accept the situation, which can be difficult. One of our monks has had a lot of serious health issues, and through working on herself, I've seen her remain positive and bright and exhibiting uncomplaining all acceptance. So I asked her about it. She said that when she was in art school, it was cosmopolitan, and I would say cool, if that's the proper word now, to swear a lot. So she did. When she decided she wanted to stop, she found that it was not so easy to break the habit, and it would have been better not to have formed it in the first place. So when she became a monk and she, was taught about not complaining, she decided that she would work on not complaining from the start and not form that habit. Which doesn't mean that it was easy, but it seemed like it worked for her. I used to complain a lot. And many of you may think I still complain a lot, but it's a lot better. I wanted to get my way. I caused myself a lot of suffering because of this. And one time, I kept myself angry for 3 months because of something that I didn't like. I was jealous of someone. And then after 3 months, something inside me said, isn't it time to let go and accept this? Okay, something from deep within, and I said, okay, I accept it. Fortunately, that hasn't happened again, but when there is a possibility of my not accepting something like that and being angry, I remember that, aha, I'm going to accept that from the start. And because I have been preparing this talk for a while, I've noticed a lot of things about the complaining mind. And I have noticed that when I don't complain and I just accept how things are, that sometimes I experience pain and grief as a result. And one example of this is being cold in the ceremony hall. To my mind, and this is not a complaint, the windows are sometimes open too much when it is very cold outside. And I am cold. First there is annoyance, why? Why is that happening? And then acceptance. And then there is a real deep grief of being cold and a wanting to get out of there. And I think this is something karmic. So I just sit with that. I sit with the grief and the wanting to get away from that. And then it passes, and I am just cold. And at times I don't even mind being cold, and at times I don't even notice it. In the past, I would have grumbled all the way through morning service. And after planning my strategy of who I would talk to about not having the windows open so much. And then I would talk to someone, and either they would listen to me or not, they would be annoyed at me or not, I would be annoyed at them or not, and there would be a whole karmic thing. So I have to say this was much better. Many of us watch the news or look at the news on the internet. When you watch the news and see that something has happened that is unacceptable to you, instead of giving into getting angry, judgmental, complaining, allow yourself to be still and feel what is underneath all these feelings. You may experience a deep grief, or even anguish at what is going on in the world. Or you may just feel anger, and you just be with what arises without giving rise to the complaining mind about what is going on in the world. I watched the news yesterday. I hadn't read it in a while. And I found it wasn't easy to accept, but I had made the choice to look at the news and read some of the news articles. And I just had to be with what it arose with me until it passed, and it wasn't pleasant. The Dalai Lama also experiences deep grief at the suffering of the world, but he doesn't hold on to it, and it passes in time. And he also feels joy, because it is at the heart of our being. The grief doesn't have to overwhelm us. Sometimes we accept something that is difficult to accept, and we're okay with that, and then something more comes, and we think, oh my God, this is too much. And this happened to me yesterday. I was really having trouble accepting something, and I was feeling stressed and anxious about this new level of something I had to accept. And so I went to the stupa to be with, I feel at the stupa being with Reverend Master Jiyu. And I read on one of the panels of the stupa, if life comes, there is only life. If death comes, there is only death. All acceptance is the key that unlocks the gateless gate. Within this place there is no suffering, no coming, no going, no ceasing, no way. There is only endless training, appearing here, disappearing there, going in and out, always becoming Buddha. And reading that and being at the stupa, being still, the anguish disappeared, but in its place was a deep grief. And I had been looking for something in Roar of the Tigers that I wanted to read for this talk, and I couldn't find it. I looked everywhere, and then I decided I would look for it once more at this particular time, and I found it. And it really helped me with the grief. So here's what she said. It's very humbling to realize how great the design of the universe is, because it is not fully comprehensible by any of us. But one can have some glimpse of the colossal size of it and how important and benevolent it actually is. Yes, all the suffering does go on an individual level, or so it seems. And so long as our faith stays true, we can help that suffering by staying within the third position. And the third position is that stillness within the heart. That does not mean that we become cold-hearted. It doesn't mean that we become non-compassionate. It doesn't mean we can't grieve. The Zen master can both grieve and cry, but his grief does not overwhelm him so that he is incapable of acting, because he himself or she is rooted in faith and meditation. And the same can be true of every monk and layperson. If you are rooted in faith and living in the third position, then when the horrors of stupidity and ignorance come, you will not be overwhelmed by the suffering. Instead, you will want to renew your own efforts, both at helping and strengthening your own faith, and in helping and strengthening the faith of others. So I think it helps when things are difficult, just to remember that there is a bigger picture. And sometimes it helps just to read the Dharma. That can sometimes really help us. And speaking of the Dalai Lama, which I was speaking of a few minutes ago, I'd wanted to read a section of the Book of Joy, which is a book about a week-long meeting of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu. And there is a section in it on the 8 pillars of joy, and the 4th pillar is acceptance. And I just wanted to read one section of this. Acceptance, the only place where change can begin. Once we can see life in its wider perspective, once we are able to see our role in its drama with some degree of humility, and once we are able to laugh at ourselves, we then come to the fourth and final quality of mind, which is the ability to accept our life and all its pain, imperfection, and beauty. Acceptance, it must be pointed out, is the opposite of resignation and defeat. The Archbishop and the Dalai Lama are two of the most tireless activists for creating a better world for all of its inhabitants, but their activism comes from a deep acceptance of what is. The Archbishop did not accept the inevitability of apartheid, but he did accept its reality. We are meant to live in joy, the Archbishop explained. This does not mean that life will be easy or painless. It means that we can turn our faces to the wind and accept that this is a storm we must pass through. We cannot succeed by denying what exists. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. The Archbishop had said that when one grows in the spiritual life, you are able to accept anything that happens to you. You accept the inevitable frustrations and hardships as part of the warp and woof of life. The question, he had said, is not, how do we escape it? The question is, how can we use this as something positive? The Archbishop's prayer practice involves reading quotations from the scriptures as well as quotes from the saints and spiritual masters throughout history. One of his favorites is the Christian mystic Julian of Norwich, whose revelations of divine love, penned shortly after she recovered from a life-threatening illness in 1373, is believed to be the first book written by a woman in the English language. In it she writes, "Deeds are done which appear so evil to us, and people suffer such terrible evils that it does not seem as though any good will ever come of them, and we consider this, sorrowing and grieving over it, so that we cannot find peace in the blessed contemplation of God as we should do. And this is why our reasoning powers are so blind now, so humble and so simple, that we cannot know the high, marvelous wisdom, the might and the goodness of the Holy Trinity." And this is what he means where he says, "You shall see for yourself that all manner of things shall be well." As if he said, pay attention to this now, faithfully and confidently, and at the end of time you will truly see it in the fullness of joy. Acceptance, whether we believe in God or not, allows us to move into the fullness of joy. It allows us to engage with life on its own terms, rather than rail against the fact that life is not as we would wish. It allows us not to struggle against the day-to-day current. The Dalai Lama had told us that stress and anxiety come from our expectations of how life should be. When we are able to accept that life is how it is, not as we think it should be, we are able to ease the ride, to go from the bumpy axle, dukkha, with all its suffering, stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction, to the smooth axle, sukha, with its greater ease, comfort, and happiness. And perhaps the most difficult thing to accept is our own death. And I'd like to give you an example of this in when I was having surgery in 1982. It was discovered that I had a large growth on my uterus, and it wasn't known whether it was benign or cancerous. And I was having surgery to remove it, and in the days before the surgery, I was meditating. I was really afraid of surgery. I'd never had it before, and it was very frightening for me. And I was meditating on the surgery and on my own death, possible death, and I remember talking to a monk who was senior to me, and he said, "Don't try and meditate on anything, just meditate. So I was doing that, and nothing was really resolving until when I was being wheeled into the operating room, something let go. And I didn't do it, but I surrendered into something deeper, and I knew that no matter what happened, it was okay. So that was certainly a blessing for me. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. And one more thing, sorry, I'm reading a lot of things, I hope you don't mind, but I found a lot of good things to read. This is another example of someone coming to acceptance of his own death. I fortunately didn't die. But this is someone who was dying of AIDS, and he found peace in the interconnectedness of all life. And this comes from a book called Being with Dying by Joan Halifax. A friend of mine with AIDS struggled long and hard in his dying, but he finally came to a place where, after a lot of pain, he decided he was suffering for all men who had Kaposi's sarcoma. In this way, he brought himself into peace. As he felt his connection with all those whose bodies bloomed with purple lesions, his self-absorption left him, and he was flooded with love. He told me one day that he could see why Christ's suffering was a model for ours. When you suffer along with everyone else, he said. In his pain, he knew he was not alone. As he spoke, I saw a tear of relief slide slowly down his cheek. His fingers reached out to mine. There was nothing to say. We simply let our fingers touch and intertwine. He then asked me to hold him and sing. As I held him, he looked like a small, emaciated child. Purple blooms covered his body. He sighed in tune with a simple song he had requested. For a time he was completely relaxed and seemed to be free of pain. And I relaxed too. He had given both of us a deep reason to live and to let go. And I've read this from other sources too, and in the Book of Joy, that when you can let go of your self-absorption and realize that others are suffering in the way you are, and you connect with that, sometimes your own pain leaves you. And the very last thing is something that Reverend Margaret pointed out to me, and it comes from Reverend Master Mugo's blog, and it has to do with dying, and it's called Fear, and it's by Khalil Gibran. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. So that's the talk. Thank you very much.